Thank you, John. I didn't know whether to put this on to have you read while I was talking to give you something to be interested in, but I reprinted this from a blog I published in January, which you can take a copy of at the end. It will cover some of the ground I'm covering tonight, but not all of it. I will, in the course of the discussion, talk about England and Wales as well as Scotland, so apologies to those who might take offence at any unionist tendency that comes out. I do work on both sides of the border because I lived and worked for 30 years in London and still adjusting to being back here, so I probably still know more about the Westminster and the English systems than I do about Holyrood, but we'll see. Tonight's subject, faith, charity and the big society. I don't mind if you want to ask me questions as we go through, as long as you allow me to get my train of thought back afterwards and catch up. So, let's rattle through the big society first. You all know what it is, I presume. This was Mr. Cameron in July of 2010 telling us that, about the big society and what it was going to be. This particular report immediately drew criticism. First, I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to read through it. It was his big idea. His aides say it's about empowering communities, redistributing power and fostering a culture of volunteerism. This is a particular comment, as we said. Perhaps it's no wonder then that Tory candidates during the general election found it very difficult to sell this idea to voters. First, it's about providing a different agenda to the day-by-day litany of cuts, cuts and more cuts, so no change there then. This is the one that gets me. Second is, as Eric Pickles, or Pope Pickles the Pious as we call it, as Eric Pickles has acknowledged, it's about saving money. If you can get people to do things for free, then you don't have to pay public servants to do it for you. So that's the agenda there. And finally, beneath the grand-sounding philosophy, hard-nosed practical politics behind the big society message. Any idea who said all that? One of our favourite institutions in the country. Political correspondent, BBC Radio 4. So quite a lot there for Mr. Cameron not to like about the BBC's coverage. He rejected all this, of course, by saying that the plans were, he rejected suggestions that plans were cover for substantial cuts and that the public were either confused or uninterested in the proposals. I don't accept that, he said. I don't accept that people don't understand what it is. One person that did understand it quite well was this guy, obviously on his way out of Hogwarts on that particular picture stage. Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And Rowan's first comment about it was that it was just a stale slogan, and also that it was an opportunistic cover for spending cuts. And we went online and in the press to say, yeah, we agree with him exactly on that, he's got it taped. Mr. Cameron took the hump at that, and he addressed the Council of Christians and Jews at Downing Street in 2012. And his comment was, I don't know why that's coming out so light, his comment was, there's a huge space between government and the individual. Yeah, can you read that? That can be filled by faith organisations, perhaps in particular, that can deliver great public services to tackle the problems of our day. So that was his response. Now, the problems of our day didn't last very long. By 2014, this is the Daily Mail, one of our favourite newspapers, saying that the big society is dead, and this was the chairman of one of the charities groups saying that it was dead in the water. So it didn't take long to get to that point. I want to go back to that statement of Cameron's. So this is what he said here, it's a bit clearer. Huge space between government and individual that can be filled by organisations, faith-based organisations perhaps in particular. So why did he single faith-based organisations out in particular? Well, you'll know this, that secularists always get told, or atheists always get told, you people do nothing for anybody else. You don't run food banks, there's a popular one for the SSS. You don't run care homes, you don't run adoption agencies. therefore, without Christianity in particular, there'd be no charity in Britain, and we'd all be waifs and strays. Now this is a battle that we've been fighting for a long time. One man who started it off, sorry about the quality of the picture, that is actually a former VP of the NSS, that's Joseph Symes. Now he was an interesting character, Symes. He was the son of a devout Wesleyan family. He became a minister, a Wesleyan minister, was given a parish in Scotland. He married a girl from Kilmarnock, which must be punishment for something he did in a previous life. By 1876 he had decided that religion wasn't for him. He joined the NSS and became one of Bradlaugh's contemporaries. Bradlaugh appointed him to be an NSS lecturer in Newcastle. He then went to Birmingham, where, get this, he opened a secularist boarding school. I've never found out what happened to that, but it's worth researching if it's possible to see what that is. He was then sent to Australia, because the people in Victoria, Australia, asked Bradlaugh, could they send someone, because they were having problems out there with the Christian government in Australia. And he spent 20 years there, going through the same sort of trials and tribulations that the nascent NSS went through in this country. And this picture was actually taken around 1880, and this particular pamphlet, I'm going to show you here, was published by the Free Thought Publishing Company, and the inside of the pamphlet says published by Charles Bradlaugh and Annie Besant. So it's a very interesting thing to hold in your hand. But this was a pamphlet he wrote on hospitals and dispensaries not of Christian origin. And what it says, the opening lines, very frequent question put to secularists, what hospitals have you built or endowed? An equally frequent assertion is made to the effect that the world owes all these institutions for the care and cure of the sick to Christianity. A greater mistake was never made, as I shall try to show. And on the same opening page he says, nature and the gods have not only inflicted floods, pestilence, famine and fire upon man and beast, but they never interfere to relieve the poor wretches of their suffering. Wherever man therefore lent his humanity and pity, most certainly no God or religion ever taught him. So that was Joseph Symes in 1880, starting to fight the battles that we're still fighting today. Earlier this year there was a survey by an organisation called NPC, which is an independent think tank and consultancy trying to make charities better, make them operate better, particularly in the area of fundraising, which is of course crucial for charities. And the MPC has came up with some statistics in that. This is England and Wales, by the way, the Charity Commission, separate system in Scotland. There are over 30,000 faith-based charities registered with the Charity Commission, they said. 7 of the top 50 by income embody some form of religious belief. And then they said 9,000 more faith-based charities than in 2006. Which a few of the Christian apologists leapt on and said, look at this wonderful explosion of care and concern for the community. It's nothing to do with it. The government, or the Labour government at the time, changed the rules regarding who had to be registered with the Charity Commission. So a lot of these charities that had already existed for decades, if not centuries, some of them, and they suddenly became registered. So they're just new registrants, they're not new charities. So that was the figures that NPC came up with. This Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, it currently has 23,950 charities on its register. You can search the register for individual charities or by their objectives, their purposes, but it's a bit primitive. 4,762 of them, nearly 20%, have advancement of religion as their purpose. 689 promotion of religious or racial harmony, 160 promotion of equality and diversity, just over 1,000 advancement of human rights, conflict resolution or reconciliation, and 8,660 advancement of citizenship or community development. Add England and Wales into that, Charity Commission has 164,000 charities, 33,000 engaged in religious activities, which is quite a wide spectrum. But roughly you can see the same percentage, roughly 20% of all the charities registered. 3,656 engaged in human rights, religious stroke racial harmony, stroke equality and diversity, but they don't have a category south of the border for citizenship or community development. So you can see there that about 20% of charities are for faith-based purposes, but it's very difficult to put a figure on it. Each individual church, for example, is registered as a charity, and each individual mosque can do the same thing. Scout groups, individual scout groups, are registered as charities. Some of them say list religious activities as part of their purpose, others don't. So you would need actually to go through the charity register, both in England and Scotland, with a fine-tooth comb, just to get an exact figure. Once everybody's registered that's supposed to be registered, you may remember that Tony Blair kicked this off, and there was a lot of publicity about private schools and whether they should retain charitable status. And this was all part and parcel of the same process. I think one of the most memorable things was, here are three organisations, Greenpeace, Amnesty International and Eton. Which one of these is a registered charity and which two aren't? And of course the answer is that Eton is a registered charity, and Amnesty and Greenpeace you would think would be charities, but they're not. So, let's have a look at one in Scotland, the Dundee Islamic Society, the Jemiah Mosque in Dundee. So I'll get the Islamophobia out the way first, okay?
No, it's Muslim baiting. That's the new term.
Sorry?
Muslim baiting.
Oh, Muslim baiting. Oh, sorry, I stand corrected. As far as Oscar is concerned, the categories it's listed are the advancement of religion, provision of recreational facilities or the organisation thereof with the object of improving the conditions of life for the persons for whom the facilities or activities are primarily intended, the promotion of religious or racial harmony, and the promotion of equality and diversity. Objectives: the conduct of public worship and affairs of the society according to the tenets of Islam in accordance with the Deobandi Sunni sect. So what do we know about the Deobandi Sunni sect? This next bit's a bit long-winded, but it needs saying. This is a commentator who said, British Muslims have been exposed to a poisonous theology from three major sources. The mullahs preach a primitive dichotomy between Muslims and unbelievers that extends to virtually every area of life. That message gets fed down to worshippers in mosques across the UK, then to impressionable minds in the madrasas, the Muslim supplementary schools. He went on to say this, what Wahhabi Deobandi Islam is, get this, is nothing but a blatant religio-cultural distortion derived not from the Quran but from manufactured religious sources like the alleged Hadith, compiled some 300 years after Muhammad's death, the Sharia, a concoction of medieval clerical opinion, and the fatwas, dubious religious rulings. And finally, with no balancing alternative that you must be an effective stakeholder and become fully integrated into society, this conditioning furnishes the perfect gateway theology for misguided Muslims to become alienated and radicalised. Who said that? It was a Muslim, Dr. Taj Hargi, director of the Muslim Educational Centre of Oxford and a founder of British Muslims for Secular Democracy, with whom we do some work. And that was in a letter to the Evening Standard entitled Poisoning British Muslim Minds. That was May 2013. Put much more succinctly, Quilliam, Majid Nawaz, they produced a report, which I've got somewhere, Mosques Made in Britain, 2009. We cannot continue to ignore the deep malaise in Britain's mosques. The current annual output of graduates from the highly conservative literalist Deobandi seminaries in northern England will meet the government's emphasis on English-speaking imams, but will fail to support British values of equality, tolerance, liberty and religious pluralism. And that's Majid Nawaz, I presume you've come across. So, when you bear that in mind, we've got Quilliam advising the government on anti-radicalisation policies and identifying the Deobandi school of thought as one of the problems, and yet in Scotland it's a charitable organisation allegedly promoting religious and racial harmony and equality and diversity. So make up your own minds about that one. Islamophobia out the way, let's go on to Christianophobia. Christian institutes. Now that's registered both here and in England and Wales. I don't know why, but it is. It's based in Newcastle. Oscar categories the advancement of religion, the advancement of education, objectives, full and promotion of the Christian religion, advancement of education, and in England to promote Christian influence in a secular world. So at least they're admitting it's a secular world, so we're making progress there. We are currently working with the Christian Institute trying to counter government proposals on these extremist orders, the EDOs, and we've said, I think there's a website, I can't remember the name of it, something about freedom of speech, where you can take the test to see if you would be, have your collar felt by plod, if you said something in particular about Islam or Christianity or what have you. And we previously worked with them on the reform of Section 5 of the Public Order Act campaign, and we had some high-level input in that from Rowan Atkinson, those of you who remember that. So let's have a look at the Christian Institute, registered charity. It's campaigned viciously and relentlessly against every single piece of LGBTI rights legislation in the 25 years since its founding. It's been reprimanded by the Charity Commission most notoriously for the organ-style donor card it produced in 2002, the cards that read, "In the event of my death, I do not want my children to be adopted by homosexuals." It's been criticised for publishing bankrolling grey proselytism, the case for extending Section 28, for being an exclusively political activity in relation to its supposed aims. I see we mentioned Section 28, so somebody pin Gary down at the back because he usually gets quite excited. And they've used research often criticised by academics for being methodologically flawed, depicting gay people as diseased or dangerous and more likely to be paedophiles. And yet this is a religious charity with religious objectives. So that's just a look at two. And all this centres, of course, around the public benefit test, which we're still arguing about. There is no statutory definition for the public benefit test. We have argued that there should be, but to be perfectly honest, it's sixes and sevens. If there was one, we'd still have problems with it to get the definition right. The problem with the public benefit test, as it currently stands, is that you have to take in, the Charity Commission and Oscar will take into account how any private benefit is balanced against benefit to the public, how any disbenefit to the public is balanced against benefit to the public, and whether there are any unduly restrictive conditions on obtaining the benefit the body provides. So you can see here there are several stools through which things can fall, and several shades of grey as to who considers this to be a public benefit and who doesn't think it's a public benefit. And this argument will go on. It's not finished yet by any means. It blew up spectacularly, of course, with the Plymouth Brethren. I don't know if you're aware of this, but suddenly they found that they had to register their charities where they hadn't been before, and there was a huge rumpus about it, given that they are quite an odd sect that doesn't care very much for people who choose to leave the sect. This is the leader, can't remember his name, don't care, but he was in the Times recently saying that defectors from the Brethren may as well commit suicide. So nice people to have a charity registration. This article in the Times is now subject of a legal challenge from the Brethren, because anything that criticises them, they immediately get the lawyers involved. So that was the most famous example. Needless to say, it brought out the Christian apologists very quickly. This is David Elphick, I think his name is, who claimed that the Charity Commission was anti-religious because it was making all these Christian charities have to go through the hoop to get registered, and they were being questioned as to the public benefit they provided. He was joined by this character, Peter Bowen MP, he was an Anglican, and he introduced a private members bill in the House to say that this was all wrong and this was secularists attacking Christians and it must stop. Being a private members bill, it failed, it didn't get the time and it failed. But 166 MPs voted in favour of it. And this was one of the comments. This is another sign of a growing secular movement against religious groups, and another example of the state interfering with the church. What is happening is creeping secularisation. Good. Well, just a few days before we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ and in recognition of religious freedom, I urge the Right Honourable and Honourable members to support my 10-minute rule bill. And what he was arguing for was to dispense with the public benefit test for religious charities, to say, oh, it's religion, that's fine, tick, approved. There was a review of the 2006 Act undertaken by the Cabinet Office, and they thankfully rejected this, and the bit in red is important. To relax the rules on the type of organisation entitled to access the special status risks compromising the role and position of the sector as a whole. So it makes, I don't know about you, but it makes common sense to me and business sense that if you have tests for organisations to get charitable status, then it pays to look into that. It's sensible. Is that the case? You know, justify why you should get it. It's just basic common sense. Whether Peter Bowen and co argued because they were just trying to wave a flag and get themselves some credence with, you know, their archbishops and what have you, I don't know. But that was what they argued anyway, that anybody who applied who was, had religion at heart shouldn't need to pass any tests. So on that score, you know, just some of the headlines that have come up in the last few years about charities with religious. And obviously secular charities make a mess of things as well. A number of religious charities faced Charity Commission investigations. November 2014, religious extremism in an Islamic charity website has articles advocating death for gays and apostates. Evangelical churches always crop up. Ex-Muslims want Islamic education charity classified as a hate group. Monks slated by Charity Commission after allowing a known paedophile to access teenagers. And proposed Islamic boarding school kicked into touch by Charity Commission. Just a few more. Evangelical churches under the spotlight for fundraising. MPs urge action on crisis pregnancy centres. An Islamic foundation closely linked to Hizb ut-Tahrir. Jehovah's Witnesses under investigation by their own, for hatred against their own members. Catholic school bans fundraising. That was a good one. Catholic school bans fundraising for comic relief, because some of the charities supported by Comic Relief were given abortion advice or sexual advice, contraceptives, etc., etc. The one I've got identified in red there, I mean obviously at the bottom as well we've got the Hindus and the Sikhs, not to leave them out. Winners Chapel, subject of Charity Commission investigation. This cropped up on the NSS website this week. This is the evangelical group run by the Nigerian, I think his name is Oyedepo, and this was about the increasing incidence of witchcraft and children being abused in witchcraft ceremonies, and all the growth comes in these Pentecostal churches coming over from Africa, which are growing rapidly. And in a lot of cases they are very much like the TV evangelicals in America. These people preach, you know, poverty and humility and all the rest of it, but they've got cars and aeroplanes and several houses and, you know, this, that and the other. So you can see that religious charities do need to pass some very strict tests, as everybody should, to get charitable status. Third Sector magazine is very good for those of you who are interested in the sector. At the Tory, it's not been widely publicised, I don't think. At the recent Tory conference, the Muslim Conservative Association, there should have been in the main conference hall a debate on Muslim charities, but it was cancelled at the last minute and forced to go outside because the Sunday Telegraph tipped off the organisers that some of the people appearing were linked to prescribed or banned organisations. So yeah, yet another issue, and for security reasons in the main, they had to meet outside. One of the interesting things about it is that some of these Muslim charities support people in Israel, Palestinians, and if you're going to do that, it means you have to deal with Hamas. And the minute you're dealing with Hamas, you're targeted, you're branded as being on one particular side. This chap here said we've just got to be a bit more clever about it, and it would help if we can show that we're working together with the Catholic Church in some areas. That makes it easier, as if working with the Catholic Church is a passport to good behaviour. A good news about a charity, again apologies for the lack of clarity on this, we had a bit of a run-in, as some of you may know, with one of the two Catholic adoption charities in Scotland, one based in Glasgow, one based in Edinburgh. The one based in Glasgow is St Margaret's, and of course Oscar agreed with us, but they went to appeal. We lost the appeal, and it'd take too long. I could do a session just on that, so I'll assume you know a little bit about St Margaret's. The other one was St Andrew's adoption register in Edinburgh, which actually took a board decision to disassociate itself from the Catholic Church. Cardinal Keith O'Brien, anybody remember him? He was the chairman or president of this thing. He stepped down, and it changed its modus operandi and its objectives in order to admit gay people to be adopted parents. And it should have received a lot more credit for this than it actually did. Well, last week or 2 weeks ago, the British Adoption Register was closed down in Scotland, and the work will now be undertaken. The Scottish Government have shipped it over for St Andrews to deal with it. So that's just quite an interesting story in the way that one's developed. Again, that's gone under the radar. Very few people have known about this or commented on it. So, why are we not a charity, the NSS? Well, an organisation associated with us did once apply for that status. This was in 1915. It was refused in the celebrated case of Bowman v Secular Society Limited in 1917. And the reason for the refusal was the abolition of religious tests, the disestablishment of the church, the secularisation of education, the alteration of the law touching religion or marriage, or the observation of the Sabbath are purely political objects. Equity has always refused to recognise such objects as charitable. So when these religious people say, well, you don't have any charities, you've got nothing like the number of charities that we have, well, you stopped us having them for a long time. So it's kind of difficult when the law of the land is against you. Does anybody know why this case got to court? What law we were challenged under? The Blasphemy Act at the time. And this was because someone who died decided he wanted to leave a legacy to us, and the rest of his family challenged that on the basis that the money was going to an organisation that was blasphemous, and therefore under the Blasphemy Act they shouldn't get the money. So the Blasphemy Act crops up in all sorts of weird and wonderful places, but thankfully we won that case at the time. And I've got a copy of when we published it on our website, a copy of the Church Times article. The editor of the Church Times gave us permission to reprint it, and it makes quite amusing reading how they go through, criticise secularism and the NSS and what it's all about. However, we have just created the Bradlaugh Trust to celebrate its 150th anniversary next year. The trust subjects are for public benefit. Now the application's gone in, and we're assured it won't be a problem. Our purposes will be the advancement of education, in particular the study and promotion of research into and the dissemination of knowledge about secularism, its history, and about the arts and sciences as they relate to secularism, and to publish and encourage the publication of research about secularism. You can see this is all ready to get designed to get David Robertson jumping out of his socks. It also includes the promotion of studies and education in the field of secularism and its founders and participants, including Charles Bradlaugh, promotion of lectures, debates, memorials, works of art, blah blah blah. Promotion of study and education on secularism related issues, including, without imitation, the history of secularism, freedom of expression, the education system, discrimination, human rights, women's and reproductive rights, and voluntary euthanasia. And to undertake all other lawful things that are conducive or incidental to furthering and advancing of the above objects. And we will be doing a fundraiser on this, and I will be passing the hat round as you leave. No, I won't really. But that's all to do with celebrating our 150th next year.
Excellent.
Part of that will be, we've commissioned a bust by a very, very good sculptor, which will be unveiled in the House of Commons, I think, in September. September is the sort of official date. And we've already got the House of Commons on board with that. There will be a glass of bubbles and a formal how's your father for it. So keep your eyes open for that on our website. In the last few months I've been rereading Bradlaugh's biography by his daughter Hypatia, and also her own autobiography, and Annie Besant's. And what these people went through is absolutely fascinating. It's a shame we can't get somebody from my age, that we should get a lot younger people involved in this, because the history is incredible, and what these people had to endure and how they fought the battle and how religious interests and the legal interests were against them. Fascinating stories that need to be brought to life. I mean, it's all on the internet. If you spend 20 minutes on Google, you can get it all, but it needs pulled together and presented in such a way to make it suitable for today's population, sort of bite-sized chunks and interesting stories. And one of the things I'm working on is, I suppose you could say, On This Day. There is a website called onthisday.com or .co.uk, which gives you a list of things that happened down the years on the 1st of January or the 2nd of January. I'm doing one of those for the NSS over its 150 years. And I've come up with some fascinating stuff and some hilarious stuff, like the rector of Stiffkey. Heard about him?
Oh yeah, the lion tamer.
Yeah, the guy who, well, he wasn't the lion tamer, he was called the prostitute's padre and ended up being eaten by a lion in a cage in a circus show. Guys like that. There's some fascinating stuff in there to be looked at. So, but we're going into the charity field, folks. I've got this article that I'll pass around the blog that I did, and I listed 3 ways that we can help the needy, the vulnerable and the less fortunate. One is to be a responsible individual. It's the Martin Luther King Jr. thing about ask yourself, what are you doing for others? That should be the essence of every charitable concern. There's a registered charity route, which gives structured help complete with government tax breaks. And then there's what we do, the campaign route, fighting for human rights and equality over discrimination and prejudice, and for inclusivity of public services rather than exclusion. And we do all that because we are funded by members. We don't get tax breaks. The church gets all sorts of tax breaks as a charity. It gets gifts. It got an extra £15 million in the budget from George Osborne to repair roofs of cathedrals. And it already gets £42 million a year under the listed places of worship scheme, which enables it to buy things like clock turrets, bells, etc., etc. This is an organisation that has a separate asset fund, today's valuation of 6.7 billion. And it's had 67 million handout in the last year from the government. You don't hear the Archbishop of Canterbury saying, no, you can have that back, or we'll separate that off, we'll fix our own churches with our own money, and we'll use that 67 million to feed the home, shelter the homeless or feed those without food. You don't hear any of that. And I'm sure if the government gave us 67 million, we'd use it in very sort of charitable ways. So my conclusion is, religion or religious belief holds neither monopoly nor moral high ground over charitable giving and care for the poor, oppressed and vulnerable, and no one route merits special privilege in society over any other. So that's basically it. I think that's all I wanted to draw to your attention, so if you've got any questions, fire away.
There's so much there. I wonder whether we fully understand the kind of psychological aspects of belief. It's very difficult to get people to be secular if they are tied by this kind of conditioning into these beliefs, and that's what we get, I think, with Islam and with Christianity. And that perhaps some of our campaigning really needs to be about looking at research into the psychological nature of religious belief, and that might help in raising the profile of the arguments that we've presented.
Yeah, I've got a very interesting article at home which I'll happily send you, if you want to give me your address or your email address, about those issues. The problem that we've got is that that's something that you would like to, that we'd all like to sit and discuss and understand. But practical day-to-day terms, when governments are doing things, it's all a bit sort of esoteric. I mean, you are right, and it's one of the reasons, of course, why organised religion wants children and wants access to children in schools. You know, the whole thing about give me a child for its first 7 years and I'll give you a Catholic for life, that sort of thing. And it's why education, particularly primary school level, is the big battleground for secularists. Yeah.
I mean, also I think with Islam, children are very early on sort of indoctrinated with ideas. It makes it very difficult for them in later life to liberate themselves from these ideas.
Yeah.
And that there hasn't been enough public discussion of that tradition of brainwashing,
Yeah.
which really is at the root of a lot of the problems that we face with these religious groups that force their ideas.
Well, there is.
Also, there should be a secular.
Yeah, there is a document here. I've got a sample, just a couple of pages, which is. It's this one here. Issued by the Charity Commission, specifically about, it's 32 pages about how to pass the public benefit test if you are a religious charity. And one of the things...
Can I just mention that I was the secretary of a religious charity, it was Tibetan religious charity.
Okay.
And its purpose was to protect one of the Tibetan non-Buddhist, pre-Buddhist traditions in Tibet, which is under attack in its home country. But we were registered as a religious charity, effectively. However, the purpose was really the maintenance of study and understanding of these traditions which are under attack in China.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, you know, there is, we have argued to the, when the 2006 Act was going through, we had said categorically that we had no argument with the advancement of religion as a purpose for a charity, but it obviously needs to be, you know, properly managed and reined in. And one of the things it says in this document, and I don't think I've got the right page with me, is it has to, we should identify and weed out anything to do with brainwashing. Now, of course, it's fine for the Charity Commission to publish it in that, but in practical terms, although it's interesting now that Cameron has announced that we're going to regulate the supplementary schools, the madrasas, about which we've been arguing for years, as has the BHA, because that's where a lot of the issue, you know, takes place, the sort of brainwashing that you're talking about. Yeah, but Christians do it as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, what I feel is that some of the people that we are governed by are influenced, without perhaps their knowledge, by very primitive ideas. You know, the psychology of spirituality is actually very primitive, and that they're not aware of it. There's a lack of psychological knowledge.
Well, if I was putting on my David Robertson hat now, I'd be standing here saying, well, you're persecuting me with talk about that and using derogatory and pejorative words like primitive and it is that's the problem. It's like the Islamophobia argument. You know, immediately you start to challenge a particular practice, the debate gets closed down by these sorts of accusations.
I do think there is obviously an issue.
Sorry.
There is obviously an issue with Islamophobia in Britain at the moment. I think you should be mindful of the way you sort of attack things, so as not to just stoke flames that have already burned.
Well, we work quite closely with people like Mariam Namazi, the ex-Muslims of Britain, and Tamina Kazi from British Muslims for Secular Democracy, Majid Nawaz, Quilliam. So we work closely with those people. It always amuses me with Islamophobia. I'm interested in seeing kafirophobia listed as a phobia, because something like 60% of the Quran is about what Muslims should do to the kafir, people like me, people like you. Christians are included as kafir. But nobody ever says, oh, that's, you know, that particular sermon's kafirophobic. Just amuses me.
They never talk about anti-goyimic either.
Sorry?
They never talk about things being anti-goyimic.
No. Well, yes, yeah.
And what do we do? How do we go into school? Because I hear so much from educationalists about tolerance of religions. And what they mean by tolerance is usually fencing off religion from challenge. And I think religion must be challenged in schools. I see a sea of headscarves on, in girls when you pass primary schools now. They'll reel off any number of prophets. How many secularists do they know? How many names of women who actually fought for their freedom and right to wear what they like? And how do they abuse it? By wearing patriarchal symbols of religion.
Well, the school thing's extremely difficult. We've got people like Eric Pickles and Michael Gove referring to us as meddling secularists. And what I imagine some of the people up in Scotland look at what Gov has done in England with the free school programme. I mean, I know Robertson, for example, has latched onto it here, and he's not the only one, believing that we should have something similar in Scotland, and parental choice is the issue. And this is one of the concerns I have. It's one of the concerns I had with your programme. Your
opt-in.
Yeah, your opt-in as opposed to opt-out thing in the Scottish Parliament, because it was based around the premise that parents should have the choice. It's an awfully difficult road to go down. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of senior educationalists who say, no, we don't want parental choice, because then you get another group of parents who come in and say, well, I don't want my children to go to any lessons that has evolution in it. Or I don't want my children to go to sex education lessons, I want to do that at home.
I think
or I don't want my children to play rugby
Yeah.
or participate in sport.
I think in our defence there was a good example of a school in North London where they did have opt-in, and it worked marvellously. There were very few parents that actually when they sat down and had the forms in front of them, actually opted their children into religious observance. So it did work in that instance.
And by that, the authorities were duly panicked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I've been dealing with a woman in Inverness who has an issue with religious observance in schools up there. And she's now got a journalist interested in writing something, but of course the journalist wants to feature her. And now she's cagey about going ahead with it because we get this problem all the time. We get approached constantly by parents, both in London, because we are the London-based NSS, Gary, and up here, with parents who say, what's going on here? With RME or RO or collective worship or whatever it might be. And we say to them, okay, well, are you a member? No, don't need to be. Well, all right, well, let's carry on. And people seem to think that we are a firm of lawyers that do pro bono work. And what we always say to people is, well, we will support you, but the school's got no obligation to speak to us. So we will go to the school, we will accompany you to speak about these issues. Oh, no, I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want it coming back on my child in school, and it dies.
I know.
And that is the biggest problem you have to overcome, is apathy. And I say that having been a parent myself and watched my children in the nativity play. There are far too many parents who drop their children off at school in the morning, pick them up in the afternoon, and what the school does with them in the meantime, they're not really bothered about. Or if they are bothered about it, they then engage in deprogramming. When they get home. We need parents to stand up and cause trouble, basically.
Well,
but it ain't going to happen, I don't think, anytime soon.
8 years they were in Kirkton Hall. 8 years before one kid brought home a book, a creationist book, and the dad saw the pictures.
I think there's a lot of different things going on how it can be tackled or how it can be confronted. Primarily, I think the religion abusing the curriculum for excellence, for a start, in getting access to children and interacting with schools and encouraging heads to adopt what is primarily a mandated piece of legislation within the 1980 Education Act that they can't get out of. And I think that's a big problem, is when it's coming from the top down, from an administrative point of view. From what we're talking about here is the parent-teacher dynamic, and how difficult that is to navigate around, or how difficult it is for the parent to stand up. But personally I think that we saw with Kirkton Home, the amount of press that garnered and the amount was primarily through fear. And it was fear of what was happening to my child, what was going on to my child. You read all the terminology that was used in the reporting, brainwashing and cult, and now I think, personally, without keeping all this in mind going forward, I'd like your thoughts on this, Alistair, is the growth of Islam in Scotland is almost, in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, it'll be 100,000 adherents to the Muslim faith. The last count for the Church of Scotland was 400,000. Now, if you extrapolate them and put a linear progression onto those numbers, I think you know that by 2027, 28, they'll overlap. But we still have, by that time, we will have a 40-year-old piece of legislation that says religious observance is mandatory. Now, I was reading the legislation again the other night because it came up on a debate somewhere. Now, the government's going to be faced with something here. And I think this is where the goalposts can actually start to be moved. With the politicians and with large parental groups, is because what are they going to do when, say for instance, where I live in Kirkcaldy, the dominant religion at that primary school is Islam, and it isn't Christianity. How do they approach their religious observance?
We've had that issue in Glasgow about 8 years ago, 7 years ago, with a Catholic school. I can't remember the name of it, I'm sorry, somewhere in Glasgow, but 90% of the children are Muslim. And the Muslim community said, that should be our school. And the Catholic Church said, no, this is still our school. We've no objection to you having your own school, but you're not having ours. And I think initially that's the sort of, I mean, governments have always got a very short-term view, you know, the next 4 years or what have you. And the danger with this is that it will constantly be kicked into the long grass, which is a standard government plan.
Yeah, but that time is coming. That crossover is not far away. And this is why right now, whenever I raise this in my own private groups or publicly through Secularist Scotland, I instantly get the paradigm shift. When I'm speaking to other mothers, there's a group on Facebook that my child, my 6-year-old, it's actually mums of Capsard. Men are apparently not allowed on this group, it's just the mums. So, you know, I've sort of asked Lorraine, my wife, to drop a couple of things in there, just to test the water, just to see what the reaction's like. That proposes that there will be a point where, and she justifies this because of the legislation, when Islam will be a necessity, because it will be the dominant faith. They will have every right to go to the school and say, we want the imam to come in here. Now, by that time, the government can't turn around and say, no, you're the wrong religion, because they're going to claim discrimination instantly. And then the parents are not going to be able to do a thing about it, because it's under Scottish law. It has to be a provision. So she discussed this, and instantly it was like dropping a hand grenade into this Facebook discussion group. Every single mother, about 30 to 45 different mothers were like, and I quote, will that fuck happen to my child? Bad my language. But that's what they were saying. That is verbatim what they were saying. It was every one of them. I'll pull them out, I'll pull them from school, I'll write to my MP, I'll write to... However, then Lorraine put the question as, well, we're atheists, and our son has to tolerate this through the Christian faith. Why do you think that's all right? And suddenly the paradigm was there. Well, actually, no, it's not all right. You're right to say that. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah,
well,
so
you can get people to agree to it.
I know that's a microcosm, but if you can actually somehow transfer that into a, you know, an actual almost campaign of some kind, I think you would then...
We need to do the research and write it up and publish the reports. I mean, just doing this presentation, when I started to get into it, you know, this is a huge area. There's a lot of crap going on in charities. Not just religious ones, but secular ones as well. And it would, you know, I could spend the rest of this year just doing research before writing stuff up. Exactly the same with you know, with what you're talking about. But you have to remember as well that you know, a few years ago there was some MSP stood up, and Patrick Harvey was telling us this. Some MSP stood up in the Scottish Parliament in the days of the Scottish Executive, I think, or it might have been Scottish Government, and talked about sectarianism in schools and Catholic schools, and he was howled down by the multitude, absolutely howled down, because it's a non-runner. And Alan Johnson, the Labour, you know, the ex-Labour minister, he's on record as, somebody suggested to him in a meeting, we shouldn't have faith schools, that should be part of Labour's policy, not to have faith schools. And his reply was, well, you can put that in the manifesto if you don't want to get elected.
Yeah.
So there's a huge hill to climb.
It's still very lively in Scotland. Right? Our last speaker, when she was
second
speaker, when she proposed this.
Rachel Thane Gray.
What's her name again? Sorry.
Rachel Thane Gray.
Yeah. Sorry. Can you give the overview as to what happened there with her?
Basically, she mentioned it, and there was this incredible hum from the room. I've never heard of it, kind of harumph noise. Basically, they had done this project about women and sectarianism. They presented it. I think she'd been working on within gender, the women and sectarianism thing. Funnily enough, one of the things the report came out with is segregated schooling causes sectarianism. People are against it, would like a change, and immediately thrown back. And she says, this is the experience of other groups as well. They've had focus groups and everything. This is what comes up, and it's just silenced by politicians.
Sectarianism is singing stupid songs at Ibrox or Parkhead. That's what the government have reduced it to. And it's interesting that the reaction as well, because in my youth, the joke about the SNP was it stood for Still No Pope. If they got elected. Because Alex Salmond came in and quoted the Catholic Church, completely turned it around the other way and said, no, we don't want to do away with your schools, we want to expand them and use them as a model for the rest of Scotland. And you can read the Cardinal winning lecture that he delivered, and the way that he and Cardinal O'Brien schmoozed each other. And then you get into, mental then you get into the Scottish Islamic Foundation, which the SNP got into, and everything that sort of came out of that. So the SNP have been very careful to court these different groups. I think it's only a matter of time before there is an Islamic school. It's got a specific Islamic school, mainstream state funded. There's been a big argument in Lanarkshire, and again, the precise details escape me, but there was an argument there about ground being given for an Islamic school, and the neighbours got up a petition against it and actually got mobilised, and I got contacted by an MSP for the area, who's an SNP MSP, thought you guys might like to know about this and come on board. And I said, what you want us? He was just going to step back, the usual thing. Can you go in there and get some publicity for this and cause trouble? So
that's part of the
I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've just thought of a fantastic campaign actually. We should call it Project Fear.
You've seen that somewhere.
You have, but it's true. It's you mentioned it yourself. We have this apathy and inertia from the masses who, I've had the same battles. Even Ethan, for instance. So I can only talk about my own experience here. I've spoken to the school 3 times, 2 emails and a letter about what he should and shouldn't have at school. But he comes home, he's mentioned Jesus, he's been singing hymns, he's told me about heaven. All these things, and
the school that I'm doing in Inverness is a non-denominational school with a Catholic head teacher, and he has told the 2 parents there that it is impossible to withdraw the children because even things like maths lessons involve a religious element. Noah had 2 dogs,
Yeah.
If Abraham takes 1 dog away, because the maths lessons are centred around, the biblical names and blah 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 and all the rest of it. And then of course you get the issue with the Challenger bus, which is run by an outfit
People with a
Mission Ministries. Now I have a Tory councillor that lives up from me who is a lay preacher in the Church of Scotland, and he and I understand each other quite well. And he has got 2 very close friends who were in conversation with the guy who runs that place, People with a Mission Ministries. And he said to them, which church do you go to? And they said, the Church of Scotland. He said, you're not real Christians then. And so, but the Challenger bus is very manipulative because it's not classed as an activity in school.
Yeah.
They're classing it as an excursion. And this particular school says it will be assumed at the start of the term that everybody goes on all excursions and there will be no exceptions.
Oh, that's
that includes
just
the
talk
Challenger.
about it.
That I'm sure happens all over the place.
That's the language used now. It's funny. I wonder if the connect there is because the head of New Reward put out a letter to every parent as well, and the final paragraph actually said the same thing. that because nobody opts out, I expect, this is her words, I expect everyone to have full cooperation with us or fully attend. So my friend just ended up having to pull her children out of school playing sick rules that day.
That's what some people do.
But have you seen the literature used to seduce the children? It's absolutely dreadful. How do they get away with that?
Well, and you've got a split because you've got the people with the mission ministries who are supported in the Challenger bus by the Free Church of Scotland, whose name crops up on a regular basis. But actually, the Free Presbyterian Church of Scotland are dead against it. And you can still find on their website the press release that says that our children, Free Presbyterian children, will not go on that bus because they are heretics.
That's fascinating.
So it's fascinating stuff. I know it's great fun for us to bounce this around and cause a bit of mayhem and trouble with it, but actually getting change, whether you try it bottom up or top down, it's still going to be a huge job.
It is.
But you have to keep doing it. And I'm actually interested here if we've got any parents, because I've spoken to this journalist in Inverness now and said, look, if I can get you 3 or 4 parents from around Scotland, because I did a lot of research on this for the Edinburgh petition, and I did a lot of research on the Edinburgh schools, and I've still got it. There's a parent I know in Edinburgh, the woman who brought the initial petition, Veronica Wickman.
Yeah, she made quite big wide press headlines with that.
Yeah. Yeah, well there's Veronica, there's you, if you're interested in doing it. This will be in a newspaper in Inverness, so it's it's not the Times, but the fact that it will go online and it'll go right. But I can present it then in such a way that says this is not a problem with one primary school in Inverness. This is a problem that's in Glasgow, it's in Edinburgh, it's in Aberdeen. But I need people who are prepared to do that. But what we get a lot of is mums and dads. I mean, I've even had a mum and dad fall out about it, but the dad wanted to do something and the mum wasn't bothered. Her attitude was, oh, it's not going to take it on board and we can educate him out of it and blah blah blah. And it caused a huge argument between the two of them. Well, but we need parents to stand up and say, no, I'm going to go public with this and I'm not worried about what reaction I get.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity actually for both organisations to have that dialogue then. Because we certainly get a lot of emails through to us from parents seeking advice, but very rarely actually knowing what to do with that next step. Because we, unlike yourselves, can't offer that level of support. We can only engage primarily through administration, through point them in the right direction.
Well, I'm not paid. I'm a volunteer.
Yeah.
I'm retired, old and sad. So I've got something to
I'm just saying it would be great just to, because like Andrew Downey for instance, last year, he was going through a really hard time at school. We've had another parent just come from us from the Grampian area as well, just having issues saying what do we do about this Bible World bus that's coming to the school in 3 weeks' time. And then in Falkirk, another parent. But we can only go so far at this moment in what we can do. But if you are amassing a case for these things,
I'm quite happy to
please talk to it. Let us work together.
As long as the parents understand that their names will be featured, then
Yeah. Alistair, sorry to change the topic a bit, but could you tell us a bit about the charitable activities and interests of the National Secular Society, and in particular, a conversation we're having within the SSS at the moment is about the kind of, should secularists do charity, what are the boundaries of secularism, core activities, other things, how big is secularism? I'm wondering how the National Secular Society approach this and how they interpret it and how that relates to your own charitable activities.
Yeah, well we're a campaign group primarily, and there's an issue about campaign groups being charities. I mean, the government tried to do something about this with what's called the lobby bill, which you will be familiar with. And there is an issue there about, it's one thing if you're shelter and you're providing accommodation for the homeless. It is another thing if you then say, right, we're going to attack the government on its policy. There's two different things at work there, and I can understand the issues. The NSS has always supported charitable work, doesn't matter who does it, but certain rules have to be followed. Arguably, we could have and should have done the Bradlaugh Trust thing years ago, because education is the thing. I mean, we're not going to run food banks, but the Christian Institute doesn't run food banks. It's a campaigning organisation and it is a registered charity. but the work it does is the advancement of religion. So I think as secularists we support charitable endeavours by everybody, and we forget what they believe or don't believe about the supernatural. But there needs to be rules, and I think it then comes down to what you are doing as an individual and what you can do on the campaign front. I don't think we've got anything to take from organisers. I mean, you can see there, even if all the charities that aren't currently registered, the religious ones that need to be registered by 2020, I think it is, isn't it? I think it's 2020. That might boost the number of registered charities that with a religious activity to something like 50,000, which is still only 20% of the total, which means 80% of charities are secular in inverted commas. So you don't have to go out there and run a food bank to feel you're doing something. It's equally valid to campaign against the systems and the structures that cause food banks to need to be in existence.
I think that's the argument, isn't it? It's because we've had that challenged against us in numerous times about you're not what charitable work you do, and I think as individuals we all do. I would assume that most people do something on their own personal charity, and for me the pushback to religious institutions or commentators that point that accusatory finger at us is, you know, it's not our role. As secularists, secularism doesn't do charity. We do it in other areas of discourse. It's not a, you know, and it's a false, it's a complete false,
campaign for
non-secular
equality and
argument,
diversity. I mean, it intrigues me that we grant charitable status to organisations that blatantly are not for equality or religious harmony or anything else. I've got a...
Well, the one thing that stood out for me was last year was when same-sex marriage bill went through. Was the Muslim Council of Scotland. I don't know if anyone actually read their statement to the government on it, but it was quite damning of homosexuality, and it was incredibly ignorant as well. It basically, the worst part of it was it basically said that it has been proven, science has proven that homosexuality is bad for the human race, that it affects children, and that under absolutely no circumstances is Islam going to tolerate this. This was a letter to the Scottish Government. And they very quickly took it down when I wrote to them and pointed out how absurd it actually was.
Yeah, this is a feature actually, because the period of research, the period of history that I research is contemporary Scotland and the history of sexuality in contemporary Scotland, and one of the things that's been worked on is looking at why male homosexuality was not decriminalised until rather recently in Scotland, and it was the opposition of the Church of Scotland and the Free Presbyterian Church, and in all of their discourse arguing against this would be the late 1960s and before, is the conflation of male homosexuality with paedophilia. And this seems to be a particularly fundamentalist religious idea, and I think it's particularly interesting that it's coming from an Islamic point of view as well. We were talking, where do they get this notion from?
I'd like to know what science science-based evidence was.
Just, I know that you had an issue with the Trussell Trust, and I actually wrote to the Independent last year, I think it was supporting the Trussell Trust, because they published a report on food banks that the government took exception to. I think my letter went in the Independent, and then I rehashed it for the Scotsman when you guys were having the argument. And this investigation that was done by NPC in December last year, this is this think tank for charities. There's a quote in here from Chris Mould of the Trussell Trust. "It's not our mission to promote Christianity, nonetheless faith is absolutely central to what we do and how we go about it." And there's another quote that was given by someone from Barnardo's, and he said, Rachel Coffey from Barnardo's, "Whether some still identify us as a Christian organisation, or whether this perception has now broadened out to a moral one, we're incredibly proud of our history because those core values still resonate with our core donors." So, and there is another quote in here about somebody saying, oh, here we are, Isabel King from the National Council of Voluntary Youth Services, "Some faith charities are struggling to get funding because funders don't want to give to religious charities." And that's not really the case. I don't mind giving to a religious charity providing it's not making any discrimination as to who receives it. So, you know, like the Trussell Trust, for example, if they are not discriminating in the aid that they give out, that's fine. That doesn't worry me. But if they were, then that would be an issue.
Yeah, they instantly played the victim persecution card the minute we brought that out.
Standard thing.
And
But
then David,
they
Mr.
knew
Robertson,
they got it wrong.
yeah, and I had to point David into commandment number 9 as well, when he said that we were the ones who went to the press with it when the press came to us with it. And he just wouldn't back down on it. I still never got my apology.
I've still not had an apology for him because he called me a liar the other week.
Yeah.
And
I
all
read that,
all I did was quote back his exact words.
Yeah.
And he said, I didn't say that, you're lying. And I sent him the
I
actual,
say I read it.
here's the link
It's
to your
incredible.
blog, and you said that you didn't say that, you're lying. Why are you still lying?
Yeah, those are questions.
Sorry.
about here.
Earlier you said that you don't mind charities getting, well, you don't mind the organisations getting charity status, you know, for promoting religion. You said you don't mind that. I wonder why you think that they deserve charity status, you know, for that per se. I think there may be religious charities that are religious should be allowed charitable status if they do provide a public benefit. But I don't think that promoting religion is a public benefit.
Yeah.
If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I think
I understand what you're saying.
I actually think that it does more harm than good, and you just need to look at the kind of evidence.
That's an even bigger problem to change that than changing the education one.
Yeah.
To get the government to agree that that should be taken away, because it's the underlying ethic is that the advancement and promotion of religion is a good thing because religion gives some people a moral framework. With a possible exception of Catholic priests. But it is, if we were to come out and say, I mean, it's been extended a bit further now. It's not just advancement of religion, because it gets extended to all other forms of belief. So if we were to say, right, advancement of religion is going to stop, then I think the British Humanist Association and the HSS in Scotland would be knocking on my door and saying, you play that.
Well, maybe they should make it something like, you know, advancement of ethics or advancement of human moral whatever.
Well, that's in there.
Yeah.
And that's the difficulty in trying to work out the numbers of who does what. Because there are, for example, scout troops that say, yes, one of our purposes is religious activities, and others that don't. There are religious charities, I'm sure, who are religious, but they're not. That's not the purpose of their charity. Their charity is equality and diversity. So it's very, very difficult just to say, right, we'll take that block. And at the end of the day, you know, for some people, their life centres around the bowling club or the football team. For a lot of people, life centres around religion, and it does a lot of good. We're not denying that.
Well,
so actually, to try and take that away is. It's not going to happen, and you wouldn't want to.
It's more just a community centre for a lot of people. It's the, you know, the sort of week tea sort of thing. A lot of people getting together.
My father is 90. He's an elder in the Church of Scotland, and if pushed, he will say that neither him nor my mum are true believers. But when they were growing up, the church was the centre of everything. It's where they met, the church danced, the church social, blah blah blah. And he always retreats into the same anecdote, which is, oh well, we met a lot of nice people and had a lot of friends and a lot of fun. So it's, you know, I've got another person in my village who says that about the bowling club he's been in for 50 years. So I don't think you can rule the advancement of religion out just as a, you know, a stroke. I don't think we want to.
Okay, one more. Okay, we really will have to wrap it up then.
Well, it's kind of a follow-on from that anyway. I mean, for me, I was discussing this with my daughter before I came out of the house, you know, and I think any time anyone puts their money into their pocket and gives money to charity, they want to make sure that money's being spent wisely. Now, there can be completely non-religious charities who don't manage the money well and it doesn't show the benefit. Same applies with, as you were saying, with religious charities. Some of them do great work, excellent. Okay, there's a homeless person, here's some food for you, here's shelter, great. The problem I have is if I give money to that charity and they go, here's some food for you, here's some shelter, and here's a Bible, you know, which happens. Or here's, let's say prayers together, right? So is there a point to be made about making sure the public are aware and conscious of which religious charities actually purely focus on the benefit of people, and which ones are more or either directly or more kind of insidiously trying to cram their religion in the back door.
Yeah, there is an effort to do that, and we've always argued against this soup for prayers, is the anecdote that's been given. There's one that crops up every year at this time of year, which is
Sorry.
the food boxes. Yeah, the Samaritan's Purse, is it?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Where the food boxes, they go overseas and they have a Bible in or a message on it. That crops up on a regular basis. I think the public are much more alert to it now, and the other thing is the public have a huge range of choice. There are so many charities now that they can give to, and I never see a religious charity trying to get money out of me at Tesco. You know, that there's all sorts of, there's a different one every day, but there's never one with a religious ethos or a religious activity in the background. But you're right, I don't think we've got any of that on our website. We certainly have details on the website of some of the religious groups that are targeted schools. People like Christians in Sport, you know, come dressed for sport and bring a Bible. And they're active in schools in Scotland. Prayer meetings in schools who claim that, you know, people are being cured by prayer. And they're all active in schools. Maybe we should do that, but it's dodgy ground to get into, because quite often it's not the charity's policy, but overzealous tin wrappers will come up with that. So it's a difficult one. But you're right, it's you want to know where your money's going, and that it's discrimination and prejudice is not being manifest by that.
Right, okay, thanks enough for coming along tonight, Alistair, and thanks for everyone. Anyone who's not given a donation, please do, because we have no money. Free memberships to the Society have been given out tonight in return for that, and there's loads of wine. Thank you, everyone.